genre of the dramatic arts that seeks to elicit a response from within an array of dark emotions: fear, anxiety, disgust, paranoia, terror, stress, gallows humor, etc.
You know, there are a lot of unsung heroes in publishing who work behind the scenes. And as you might guess, editors are really the secret weapon to a lot of the books that we all know and love so well. Jeanne Cavelos is one of the greatest editors of the 20th century when it comes to genre fiction. Wow, what a great record with the Del Abyss line and her work in the Odyssey workshops. She has single-handedly influenced a whole generation of authors. I know she helped make me a better writer, and I don't think I would have won the Bram Stoker Award for my first novel, Grave Markings, if it wasn't for her handiwork. She taught me a lot about how to write, how to kind of when to hold back and when to let it out. And God, did she have some insightful ways of looking at fiction based in a lot of experience. She is amazing. She's a kind person, a smart person, and a humble person. And, I wish more people knew about her. She deserves an award for everything she's done in her lifetime.
Hi, Jeanne. It's Rick R. Reed, author of the Del Abyss titles Obsessed and Penance. And I just wanted to give a shout out to you and a big thank you for believing in me at the start of my career, and for all your wonderful editing and support of the genre and of me, and sending you all best wishes. And again, thank you so much for taking a chance on me when no one else did. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Brian, and it's been 11 months since my last grooming ritual.
Hi, Brian.
I was not always as I am now, and it's only going to get worse before the lockdowns are over. But at least I can say that I had the privilege of working with Jeanne Cavelos at a pivotal time in my life and career. I had published my first couple of novels already and had just finished up a third one, Nightlife, when the stars aligned, and Jeanne brought me into the fold as one of the first authors signed to the Del Abyss imprint. So we ended up working together on Nightlife and then my next 3 books after that. There's a part of me that will probably never stop missing those years because of what I was blessed to be a part of and because of how Jeanne operated. Jeanne, along with her assistant, Tony Ganji. I don't want to overlook Tony, because if I couldn't get Jeanne on the phone, great, I get to catch up with Tony. But I just so much appreciated the kind of idealized working relationships that Jeanne cultivated with her authors. Not only the nuts and bolts of our manuscripts, but also the presentation, how gorgeous the books looked, promotions and everything that she did for the whole stable of us at conventions and other events. You could trust that Jeanne was putting her heart and soul in all of this, always. And I loved it at the time. I think back on it fondly now. But as with any long, fruitful association like that, there are going to be things you get out of it, ways that it impacts you that you aren't necessarily aware of at the time. These are the things that dawn on you later. And maybe the greatest lifelong impact that came out of my years of working with Jeanne was how she taught me to revere the editorial process. Not just tolerating editorial oversight, but coming to welcome and even cherish it. See, the thing about the best editors is that they can lovingly help steer you out of your own way and push you farther than you might have got to if left to your own wanky self-satisfaction. So it's always been standard operating procedure for me to obsessively pore over anything that I've written and go over it and over it and over it and try to make it the best that I possibly can at the time. But that's still never enough. It's rare for a writer to develop and deliver something that has zero room for improvement. You know, in a self-contained bubble, I might only get 90% of the way there, 95% of the way. So to me, what a great editor does is to help you identify and close the gap on that last 5 to 10%. But now trusting that part of the process and eventually coming around to loving it, that was a lesson I badly needed to learn at the time. I needed to learn the kind of humility through which I could submit to this formerly invasive process and trust that my work was going to end up better for it. Now, that can be a tough hurdle for any writer to clear, especially early when maybe you've had just enough success and experience behind you to think that you know it all. Editorial oversight can be a tempting thing for an author to disregard or to chafe against, and sometimes I did. Not proud of that. Now, wherever it comes from, either a place of ego or defensiveness or insecurity, I needed that resistance burned out of me. And the funny thing is, Jeanne was always so kind and diplomatic that I didn't really realize that she was also periodically taking a torch to me. Totally worth it. You know, there's an old saying that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And in that spirit, I've come to believe that my path aligned with Jeanne's path at the perfect time, like no other colleague that I have ever dealt with. She left me better than she found me, which is, I think, one of the most noble things that anybody can deserve to have said about them. So, Jeanne, to speak directly to you now, you left me way better than you found me. And I can only hope that I brought some measure of good into your life at the time as well. I've always been profoundly grateful for the opportunity that you gave me then, for the space to work and learn and grow, and for your guidance over what turned out to be highly formative years. I adored you then. I have adored.
Welcome back to Visited by Voices Live. The 1980s were over, and the new decade began with kind of a whimper. Horror had had an explosive growth in the 80s, but it was kind of unsustainable. Too many of the publishers were chasing that same kind of Stephen King next generation of writer. They were trying to find that next brand. But there was at the same time a generation of writers coming up, people like Brian Hodge and Kathy Koja and Melanie Tem and Rick Reed and Mike Arnzen and Lisa Tuttle and Dennis Etchison and Tanith Lee and Nancy Holder. They were ready for the task. They had their own voices and they wanted to go places where the genre didn't traditionally go. All they needed was a home. The house mother of their eventual home would create some of the most mind-bendingly original collaborations with her stable of artists. As a young man going to a bookstore once a week, a Del Abyss title was an instant buy. So it is extremely, extremely humbling to welcome to Visited by Voices, Jeanne Cavelos. Hey, Jeanne.
Hi, Lauren. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, that intro almost made me cry. It was so great to see my old authors.
You know, it didn't take much convincing to have them do it. I just said, hey, I'm having Jeanne on. You know, that's a life dream of mine. They're like, what can we do? So I think you made more of an impact than you could imagine. You did definitely on an entire generation and of writers and readers. I would never have picked up writing as a serious thing if it wasn't for you. Definitely not. But I want to start really at the beginning where I start all these conversations. How does such an important person in the genre get initially bitten by the horror bug? What got you into it?
Oh my gosh. Well, I loved horror from as far back as I can remember. When I was in second grade, I won a contest for writing a Halloween story. The prize was a painted, decorated pumpkin, which I was super excited about. I'd written a story about a witch, I think. But I think I was attracted to horror because I was very attracted to the emotional experience, feeling intense emotions, whether they're fear or terror or happiness or whatever. But to me, the most intense emotions I would feel would be when I was reading horror or watching horror. My mom played no small part in it because she would take me to R-rated horror movies when I was, I don't know, 10 years old, 12 years old. I remember once we went to this dusk to dawn horror marathon where there were 5 horror movies, all with the word blood in them, in the title, like that was the theme, blood. And you got a little packet of green blood when you came into the drive-in. I mean, it was like the best thing in the world. He also smuggled me into Andy Warhol's Frankenstein,
Whoa.
which was rated X when I was maybe 14 or 15. I don't think it was so much that she loved horror, but she knew I did, and it was like an adventure we could go on, and she was game for it. So yeah, so I've been reading, watching, and writing horror since a pretty young age, and it's so, when you talk about the 1980s and how things got overpublished and there were a lot of disappointing books out there along with some really good ones. That was me too. That was my experience. I was reading those and I was taking a chance on some new writer and often disappointed because publishers were just throwing anything out there because horror was hot and they thought the readers were not very didn't really care too much about the quality. You just had to have like a skeleton on the cover and some people dying and they would like it.
Even better if the skeleton is in a cheerleader outfit, right?
Yeah, I guess that would.
Thank you for being partially responsible for breaking that tradition to smithereens. So from the little girl in the drive-in watching Andy Warhol's Frankenstein, Flesh for Frankenstein, which you absolutely shouldn't have seen, and I'm so glad that you did at that age, because we're where we are, right?
Yeah.
So first, you don't go exactly into the world of horror editing directly, though. First, you decide to just take a small side jaunt into astrophysicist as an astrophysicist at NASA.
Yeah, well, my career goal was to become an astronaut like Charlton Heston in the Planet of the Apes. He was my role model, and I thought in the Beneath the Planet of the Apes, the sequel, when he blew up the entire planet, that was like a really cool thing. And so that was my goal. So I have horrible vision. So I realized I could only be an astronaut if I became a scientist first. And I was fascinated by the universe. Several of the things that troubled me a lot as a youth were, what's going to happen when the sun burns out? Why doesn't the government have a plan for that? What about entropy? We need to work on that one. So I had a lot of cosmic thoughts and interests and concerns. And so astrophysics seemed like a natural thing. So I, studied, went to work at NASA, and gradually realized that what I really loved was thinking about the ideas of science fiction and horror and writing. rather than actually being a scientist. And that wasn't quite the right place for me. So that's when I decided to go get my master's in creative writing and get into publishing while I wrote, after work every night to see, well, how did this publishing thing work? Maybe that could help me out when I'm ready to get my work published. And then once I was in publishing, I fell in love with that whole process of discovering a manuscript in the slush pile, some book that you get really excited about, and then you convince everyone in the company to get excited about it, and then the boss says, okay, you can offer a few $1,000s and buy that book and we'll publish it. And working with the author to make it as best it can be, to really more fully realize their vision. As Brian was saying, that extra 5 or 10% that you can maybe help the author improve it. And I just loved doing that. It was kind of like solving a math problem to figure out, well, like, okay, why am I not feeling what I'm supposed to be feeling at this point in the book? How can we change things to make those feelings happen? And then it was very exciting to see, the improved manuscript and see that, yeah, oh my gosh, things are really working now. And then to have it come out and have people read it and enjoy it and love it and, get praise. And so that was really, really exciting for me.
So we go into February of 1991. Now, you at this point are you senior editor at Dell at that point, or?
No, I don't think so. I can't really remember. Let's see, 1991. Maybe I was an editor by that point. Yeah, I was probably an editor, I guess. So when I would have pitched the line, the Abyss imprint, to Dell, probably would have been a year before that, because we started publishing in 91. So it would have been at least, I think, a year before that I would have pitched it. And I think maybe at that point I wasn't quite an editor yet. I can't really remember the dates of, when I had different titles. But anyway, yeah, so what was happening at Dell at that time, around 1990, was that they didn't really have a horror program. They didn't have a horror editor. They just had, these other editors, romance, mystery, thrillers, whatever. And occasionally somebody would kind of send them, because they didn't know where else to send it, a horror manuscript, right? And they'd look at it and they'd go, well, I know there are some people who would like this, but they had no, context by which to judge whether they were good or not, because they didn't read that stuff. That was other people, read that stuff. So they'd buy these really bad horror novels, and then they'd publish them with the skeleton with the cheerleader outfit on the cover, and then they would not do very well. Maybe in the 80s they were doing well, but by 1990, readers were feeling very much like us. They were getting sick of derivative, uninspired, or just not very well written horror. Not to say it wasn't. There was, there were good things, but there was so much being published. And this is the way publishing works over and over, and still does today, is that some area gets hot. All the publishers jump in. They buy as many books as they can in the hot area. They get them out there. Some are good, many are not so good. And then readers read them and read some of the not so good ones and say, I think I'm tired of this stuff now. And then they quit buying them, and then the publishers pull back. So that's what was happening at that time. The publishers were all pulling back, saying, you know what, we overpublished. People are not so hot for this stuff anymore. And so I thought to myself, well, if there was a line that people could trust of authors, that there was a commitment to quality, that there was a commitment to originality, that there was a commitment to providing more sophisticated stories, not the same old thing, but things that were a little bit more challenging and interesting. It worked on different levels. It wasn't just like, the good protagonist versus the evil force. But there was maybe some grayness on either side, that there would be readers to read them, that there would be people who would want to buy them. So I started to make that argument, and there were people in the sales force who supported that argument, who said, not so much supported like the content that I was just talking about, but supported the idea of, hey, publishers are pulling out of this area. There's sort of a vacuum. There's room for someone to move in who has a vision. And so I happened to be like the right person at the right time who had some sort of vision to fill that gap.
So I'm assuming that either through an agent or through a slush pile, a document titled Fun Hole comes to you. We'll get to how you sold something with the name Fun Hole to your superiors in a second, but how did you know that was the line's lead title? What screamed to you about Kathy Koja's ultimately cipher?
Yeah. So it came through an agent, and I had the editor's lunch with the agent. I was having, at that point, I think I had gotten the go-ahead to do the line. So I'm meeting with every agent who handles anything close to horror as fast as I can, telling them my vision for Abyss, what I'm looking for, and telling them to send me what they have. And at the time, Kathy had a brilliant agent named Russ Galen who said, I have the perfect author for you. I have the perfect book for you. I'm going to send it to you. So, as agents do, he kind of got me excited, but, they all say that sort of thing. So I take it with a grain of salt. But when I started reading it, immediately the style stood out as not somebody trying to be Stephen King. Like, here I am having read manuscript after manuscript of people writing with parentheses and italics, right? Like Stephen King's things, right? He does a lot of parentheses, and every time I see parentheses, it's all I think of is Stephen King. It's like, pick a different stylistic element if you want to do something. Don't do that. Anyway, so here was a style that was very different. Here were characters who were very different. It wasn't the 30-something writer or English teacher who wears the corduroy jacket with the patches on the elbows, who's got like one little problem, or maybe one slightly more serious problem. Maybe he's, traumatized from something in his past. Maybe he's an alcoholic. Maybe he has trouble with people or whatever, who's going to go and deal with his evil and have his personal problem solved by the end of the story. That was not who these characters were. That was not how the story operated. I mean, everything was different. It was like, yes, this is what I'm looking for. This is taking horror to the next level. It's offering something different, more complexity, more psychological aspects. Something that I had, I think, in the original Abyss proposal was something like, it's not about the monster, it's about how people react to the monster. And that's like the interesting thing that I want to see. And that's exactly, the fun hole, they find this hole in the floor, and what do? They start to experiment by dropping things down in it and pulling them back out again. Not the normal thing you would expect people to do when faced with a hole in their floor. Anyway, so that's why it stood out for me. And
I think it became kind of the hallmark of the line, because it was a shot across the bow to the industry in a way. As a horror reader at the time, I knew kind of like just from flipping the book over that this was something different. Everything about how the book was packaged, presented, and also there seemed to be an amount of respect for its readership, even from the packaging down, certainly in the presentation, the manuscript. This was something that I would expect a small press to do, but not do as well. If that makes sense to you. I will say that I always refer to Kathy Koja as the Patti Smith of horror. Because just as Patti Smith rewrote what was possible for women's rock, which is a ridiculous term, kind of that's what Del Abyss kind of did to the whole horror genre. And at first, it might have sounded like that after the line was gone, there was a period where maybe you felt like, oh, maybe we didn't really accomplish much. But then you look today and you realize the entire landscape has completely been changed. And it started in February 1991 with the publishing of Cypher.
Well, I think maybe the reason that you felt that there was respect coming from the books to the readers is that I felt like I was talking to readers who are similar to me. That original statement that we had like on page 1 of every Abyss book for the first while was really something that I would want to read. That would get me excited if I picked up a book and it was like saying, yeah, we know you've read a lot of these other kind of things, and this is something different that we're trying to offer you, quality and originality and stuff. And so that was very much a heartfelt, thing that I it's the line of books that I wanted to read that I'm creating. And yeah, we spent a lot of time on the covers. I went out and found particular artists that I wanted to work with, which is not the usual thing for an editor. Usually the art department comes in and, they want to hear like, well, what's the plot? Is there a skeleton?
Is there a skeleton?
Is there a cheerleader in it or whatever? And then they'll go find an artist to do that. But I thought that having a different look was critical so people could recognize the books, and also so they would be sending that message that we're not the same old thing. So for example, the cover artist on the Cypher was Marshall Aresman, who was a famous artist at the time. He probably still is, I don't know. But a very respected artist, not somebody who did book covers particularly. But I knew his work, and I thought it was so evocative and emotional, and it's like, that's the kind of thing I want on the cover, not these literal kind of silly things that maybe appeal to 10 or 12-year-olds or something, but things that suggest more. Anyway, so we tried to really create some different looking packages that would be distinctive.
It always was one of the things that I came out of the 80s most upset about, is that when William Peter Blatty's Legion came out on paperback, it was that die-cut cover with the possessed priest. And it made what is one of the most literary novels the genre has ever had into looking like a trashy, back pocket paperback. And that broke my heart. To see like great novels coming out that are being treated with the respect, and the audience being trusted to be brand loyal to something that's obviously a higher quality was amazing.
We do judge books by their cover. I mean,
sure.
We have to. You can't read every book.
No. There are some questions coming through the chat, so I want to make sure I get them in, because believe it or not, and I told you this would go fast, we're already half hour in.
Wow.
Exactly. Friend of the show, Dan from Flesh Wound Features asks, if Del Abyss were relaunched, what 5 up-and-coming horror writers would you like to be part of the line? They don't have to be up-and-coming. They could be anyone, because you had some established writers that did eventually join the line back in the day.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, if I was relaunching it, I'd want to get some of my original authors back. I might even have to go into the afterlife to retrieve a few of them and get them to write another book. Yeah.
We just had Steve Tem on the show just a couple weeks ago. Obviously, you worked with Melanie. There's a big loss to the community.
Huge. It's so funny because I was just thinking about Melanie today, and for a moment, maybe you do or maybe you don't. What sometimes happens when you think about somebody who has died, and you kind of think, oh, I got to call her and tell her about this. And I was like, that just happened to me like an hour ago. Yeah, it's a huge loss. I think she had so many more great books in her. But speaking of Steve, he's one that I would love to include in a relaunched Abyss line. I think our timing never lined up as far as, he was mostly writing short stories at that time and struggling to write something longer, as I recall. But I would have loved to work with him on a novel.
Well, maybe there's an anthology in your future. Pull all your contacts out of the Rolodex. I think the audience is there for it. Shadows of the Abyss. I don't know.
Maybe so.
Griffin asks, did you ever think the Del Abyss line would become so heavily sought after, even so many years after the line ended?
No, absolutely not. I'm thrilled that people are still interested and that these books are still drawing people and resonating with people. And I'm excited that they kind of seem to be making a comeback in recent times, because I think they deserve, more attention and more readers. And I love seeing that happen. Yeah, but I kind of thought, I was sad, I wanted to focus on my own writing, and editing had taken over my entire life. When I started in publishing, I was like leaving right at 5 o'clock. I was like the worst editorial assistant ever, because I would just leave right at 5 o'clock and I'd go home and I'd get my box of powdered donuts and my glass of Diet Coke for dinner, and I'd sit in front of the computer and work on my writing. But then gradually I got promoted and I was bringing manuscripts home, and I was reading submissions and editing manuscripts at night, because you don't do that from 9 to 5 at the publishing house. And my writing had gotten squeezed out. And I remember I read an article in Publishers Weekly about this editor who was retiring, who said, now I'll finally have time to write that book I always wanted to write. And I didn't want to become that person. So I left with the hope and some encouragement that they were going to hire somebody to replace me, and then that didn't turn out to happen. So I thought, well, gee, that's really sad, but I'm glad I got the chance to do what I did. But I kind of thought, the books and the line and all memory of it would fade away. So it's great that hasn't happened.
Well, as you've outlined, the choices were either you as an astronaut blowing up the planet or producing, legacy titles in the horror genre. So I'm kind of glad which one we got.
Well, there's still time for the blowing up of the planet.
Yeah. You just behave. So a friend of yours, Mr. Mike Arnzen, says, I always admired how Abyss owned up to its reference to Nietzsche and often explored existential horror issues too. One of the ways it broke away from the predictable supernatural tropes of the time. And it's almost like he's teeing me up here. So Del Abyss got me thinking about what horror could be, which I always had thought about. Like, can't it be more? And then here was concrete proof that it absolutely 100% could. But in my mind, I needed to be able to talk about it and separate it from the genre at large. So what I began referring to the books that, or the majority of books anyway, that Abyss was publishing was progressive horror, in that it was progressing past what the 80s had set up, which was, a kind of very tropey, very, hey, what did Stephen King do 2 years ago? Well, now there's 7 books on the market that feel just like it. Well, this seemed like it was moving forward finally. We were moving past the Thomas Tryon and Stephen King and William Peter Blatty years. We were finally kind of escaping that. What did you intend to move the genre forward, or was it just purely you just wanted quality fiction out there? Was it a byproduct or was it vision?
Well, I was definitely looking to push the genre out of where it had been. I think you have to, by necessity, do that, because that's what the problem was that not those great authors that you just named, but all of the people trying to be those great authors and not being able to, because that's not what's in their heart. That's what they think the market wants. It's called chasing the market, and you see writers doing that sometimes, and I try to tell them, you can never be a better blank than blank is. You can't be a better Stephen King than Stephen King is. So be whoever you are, be the best whoever you are. Anyway, so I think it was partly by necessity, because that was already being done, and I could say, yeah, we're going to just do the high quality Stephen King impersonators, but that
was being done too.
But no, I really wanted to, because this was all about, I was fairly new to editing. I mean, I started in publishing in 1987. So by 1990, I'd worked for 3 years, mostly as assistant, and then working my way up to handle books on my own. But I was operating mainly on what I felt and what I wanted to see and what would have appealed to me, because I didn't do any, no publishers, at least at that time, and probably still, do market research to see what people want. It's mostly just what they think and feel. So that's what I was going on. And that's what I wanted to see, was the next thing. I wanted to push it beyond where it was and see, can it be more? What more is there? What does that mean to take it to the next level? Is it existential? Is it psychological? We struggled with trying to come up with a quick description for it. Often it was about what it's not. It's not these familiar things. And sometimes we would call it psychological horror, but then people would think, oh, it has no supernatural aspects. But what it really was horror that kind of emphasizes, as I said, the reaction to the monster, the psychological aspect, what's going on with the characters, how does this struggle affect them, how does it play upon their weaknesses, how does it bring out their dark side, how does it bring out existential issues that they are struggling with, that sort of thing. So, sometimes they tell writers, well, write the book that you wish you could read. And I think for me as an editor, it was, buy and publish the books that you wish somebody was publishing.
That's so rewarding to hear. You have no idea. Yeah, I think, I have a definition I include at the beginning of every video of the horror genre, and it's about the reaction. I define the genre by how the effect it has on the reader, right? Or viewer, or, whatever your art form is. It's because how else can you fit, again, William Peter Blatty and Edward Lee in the same genre? How can you fit the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Haunting? It doesn't make any sense unless you realize that there's a array of emotions that make sense together. But it's a very emotional genre. So I think when you supernatural, psychological, transcendent, these are all really the same thing. We're dealing with the uncanny and the whole emotional range that goes with it.
Yes, Steve Resnick-Tem, to bring him up again, wrote a really interesting essay talking about how horror is not just about the emotion of horror. It's about this whole spectrum, which you have in your intro, some of the words from that spectrum of emotions. And, also to me, those emotions are critical in all genres of literature, in all stories. We want to read about people who are really upset, scared, terrified, disturbed, lost, in despair. Those are very powerful emotions, and I think for some reason to say a story or a genre is going to focus on those emotions somehow makes people think that it's somehow lesser. Like, how is that the case? Because it's interesting that we define genres in different ways, right? Like the Western is defined mostly by a setting, a time period and a place, and then there's usually some kind of plot elements attached to it. A romance is defined by the character relationships that are happening. A mystery is defined by its plot. Horror is defined by its emotion. Douglas Winter famously wrote about that. And that leaves everything else off anything can happen. The plot can be anything. The setting can be anything. The characters can be anything. All you need to do is give us some of that array of emotions that you're talking about. And so then it's ironic and sad that so many of the plots and settings and characters are so familiar and so repeated when they don't need to be. So that was another part of my thing that I was trying to kind of break and explore. Well, what else can we do?
Mr. Jordan asks, does Jeanne think that physical media is dying, books and movies? And does she have any ideas on what we can do to save it? No pressure.
I have to save some stuff before I blow up the planet.
Oh, that's true. It seems counterproductive to your end goal.
Nah, I really do want to save physical media. I'm all for that. Well, I don't really think that, at least right now, I don't think that physical books are dying. There was much thought that would happen maybe 10 years ago. But really, the market seems to have reached some sort of equilibrium, or at least people are still very much exploring and buying and reading physical books. I think people are getting a little bit sick of having to look at screens all the time, and it doesn't really feel like fun, at least to me. When I'm looking at a screen, I'm usually working. And so I don't want to be consuming my media that way, my books that way anyway. So I think the market does not support the idea that physical books are dying. Certainly they're lesser than they were, and certainly some books are more likely to succeed as ebooks than as physical books. Romance novels, for example, are very, very popular as ebooks and not so much as physical books. Horror is somewhere in the middle. More literary books are more popular as physical books. So I don't think that's happening. As far as movies, I mean, who knows what's happening with this pandemic and everything. I'm not sure how that's going to shake out. But hopefully our movie theaters will survive, because that's a great experience. And I love seeing Elijah Wood 100 feet across with his blue eyes, all gigantic. Yes, I love Elijah Wood.
That was pretty specific, I was going to say.
Sorry. A little too personal, perhaps.
So Jeff Bradley wants to know what you think the next level of horror is these days.
Oh, boy. That's a good question. I've seen some good horror recently, but I can't say it really maybe broke through to like a next level. It was just sort of well-written, good horror. So I don't think I've seen that yet. If I were to imagine what it is, I think I might imagine that it involves bringing in some elements from another genre. I don't know if that's science fiction or fantasy or something else. I think I got to think more about that one.
Maybe a heist novel with cosmic horror elements? Oh, was that very specific? I'm sorry, I won't do that again. So, I think the problem... Go ahead.
I just saw a little while ago The Lighthouse with Robert Pattinson. Awesome. I mean, that's a horror movie.
Absolutely it is.
I don't think it was marketed as a horror movie. I don't think people went to see it because they thought they were going to see a horror movie, but it was a horror movie. it was a little Lovecraftian, it was psychological, it was fascinating and intense. If somebody can do something like that in fiction, then there we have it, the next level. Or maybe that's just kind of like what Abyss was doing. I would like to think there's something in common there.
I think that the new level of Gothic novels that's been coming out over the last 2 years or so, there's been some work that I think would fit in the Abyss line if the Abyss line had never stopped. I think Danielle Trussani's The Ancestor fits there. I think Stephen Graham-Jones' Only Good Indians fits there. So I think there is work out there, but I agree that I haven't seen that massive step forward that, again, Cypher, I think, represented at the time it came out. And I don't mean to just talk about just that title in a vacuum, because you actually published, in my opinion, the best modern horror novel, and that is Prototype by Brian Hodge. I think it is a fascinatingly dark, bleak, but strangely addictive novel. I mean, I've never done heroin. I've never done any drugs, but that book is kind of like heroin, though, because you can't stop and you know it's not going to end happy.
Brian wrote such bleak stuff sometimes, and just really dark and so fascinating.
Was he hard to work with? You can be honest, because he kind of intimated that he was. And he's a friend of the show, so.
Well, I will say that I also, being fairly new to having editing responsibilities, right? I've, handled some books before the Abyss line started, but here's where my heart was. Here's where I cared about every paragraph and every sentence and every word. And so I would provide these reams and reams of feedback to the authors, 25, 30-page editorial letters about revisions, going through all of this stuff. And so it's also a learning curve. Brian talked about the learning curve, or learning how to deal with feedback and accept it, and then finally realize that it was actually a really good thing and welcome it. And it's the same thing with editors. When you're a new editor, I think you tend to, or at least I think I went overboard sometimes by, putting down every thought I had and every suggestion I had and every way in which I thought the manuscript could be improved. When you later on, as time goes by, you kind of pick your battles, choose the most important things, and focus on the issues that are kind of persistent through the story rather than one-time things so much. Anyway, so I'm sure that it was no picnic to deal with me and my 35-page editorial letters, but we had a great relationship. I mean, I have such fond memories of meeting up at conventions with the different Abyss authors, and we'd have these insane events where, you would have contests and we'd have prizes and we'd have glow sticks, and, I'd, take $30 or something and try to make a party out of it to help promote the books at, the World Fantasy Convention or wherever. And we just, really were all excited about what we were doing. And so it was a wonderful experience.
I'd like to just have your moment to talk about Dennis Etchison, who I think is probably one of the finest short story writers the genre has ever had. That's not to slag his long fiction, but his short stuff is just like unreal.
Yeah.
Obviously, it would be great if he was here to represent himself, but since I'll never have that opportunity, can you just spend a moment to talk about working with him?
Oh, he was such a gentleman, and he was so smart and well versed in horror. We would have these fascinating conversations about the genre, about what he was trying to do in his books that I had the privilege of working with him on. and his anthology work, which was incredible. So I was so happy to be able to include him, because part of the consequence of launching this line, when horror was basically crashing, nobody was buying it anymore. At least nobody was buying a lot of the authors except for the top people, was that any established author in horror who was not one of the top people had pretty horrible sales figures. So if I bought a novel by an established horror writer, and then we tried to sell that book into Barnes & Noble, they would look on the computer and they'd go, well, his sales were up here in 1985, and then here in 1988, and then here in 1989. We're not going to buy any, or we're going to buy, 3 copies of this book because this author's sales have gone like that. So the editor-in-chief at Dell pretty much told me, anybody who's established, we're not going to buy them for Dell Abyss, because they are going to have these horrible track records and we won't be able to sell their books in to the bookstores. So it was really fortunate. So several times I tried to buy well-known, really great horror writers, but I couldn't, because of that fact, which was not their fault. It was just the whole market was going that way. So I was really happy to be able to get Dennis and have that work out for us.
Well, I'm grateful too, because again, when you have one of my favorite writers of all time and my favorite editor of all time working together, that's magic right there. I don't care who you are. Is there any book that came out in the line that you were surprised didn't do better than, because it deserved to, than it did?
I love them all, so I expected all of them to be great and do great and win awards and stuff, and so they all can't do that, I know, but that was it's always tough to choose between your children in a way. So I don't know if I have like a specific one that really stood out in that way. Maybe Toplin. To me, that was just so Toplin was a novel by Michael McDowell, which was published by a small press with some really weird photo illustrations in it, and to me, that is like one of the weirdest books I ever read, and that's really high praise, and seemingly quite unlike other things written by Michael McDowell. Anyway, so that one really seemed to me like it would, like other people would find it very weird and interesting as well. But I don't think it quite got the attention that I had expected.
Jeff Bradley's just stepping in to say that Prototype is a single favorite novel from a prose perspective. The hard work shows. Well, hell yeah. It's a mesmerizing book.
Yeah, Brian's a great writer.
Yeah, absolutely. Griffin is asking, have you ever played any of the original 4 Silent Hill games? I personally think those 2 games perfectly capture the themes and ideas that the books from the Abyss line also evoked. I got to warn you, I've never played Silent Hill, so I can't even go near this.
I have not either. I'm not a big gaming person, but I have seen the movies, Silent Hill, and I think I saw 1 or 2 sequels. I'm sorry, I don't remember, but I really enjoyed them, and the settings to me were super creepy. And so I think I would really like playing those games, because if I get to move through those settings and have those creepy things happen, yeah, it had a very I don't know how to describe that quality. It was foreboding. It was disturbing. Those settings, the place. Yeah, that really spoke to me. So yeah, the original film I think was the strongest one. of the ones I saw. But I guess I have to find the games now. I used to play like the games at the arcade, right?
I grew up with Donkey Kong too. Don't worry about it.
I forgot the name of the one where there were these zombies and we'd go into the House of the Dead or something like that. Played a lot of that. But then when they, I don't want to buy a gaming console and lose my life and time to that, because I know lots of people who do. Oh, and I got to answer your old question. Sorry, Lauren, you had asked me how do you buy a book called The Fun Hole?
Oh yeah.
The way you buy a book called The Fun Hole is you tell your boss, "Hey, I want to buy a book called The Fun Hole," and the boss says, "Fine, we're changing the title."
Immediately, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was just like that.
I'm sure. It's funny when Kath was on the show. She was like, "Yeah, I lost that battle," and I was like, "Yeah, I don't see how you're gonna win it, especially you're talking about 90. I mean, that the book was really in production in 90, I would imagine, right? And it's to come out in 91. So yeah, no.
Yeah, there would be whole states full of bookstores that would not order a book with that title.
No.
So it wasn't that it was like personally offensive to any particular person. It was just the marketplace.
Right, well, it was the days when the Roseanne show used the word "sucks," and that was a big problem. So yeah. All right. So Mike wants you to acknowledge that Poppy Z. Brite was another big breakthrough from the line. Of course.
Absolutely. Huge.
No question about it. And that actually leads me to one of the other things I just wanted to briefly talk to you about, which is that your line opened up different perspectives from people who were living different types of lifestyles that traditional publishing wouldn't, in genre anyway, wouldn't really embrace as firmly. Rick Reed has made a hell of a career in gay erotica since, but I don't think there was that easy of an embrace at that time. Did you have any pushback?
Trying to remember. I think things went pretty well. The main problem would come if the title of something was clearly offensive or suggested something that would offend people, like The Fun Hole, or if on the first page or two something explicitly sexual or something really grotesque or something happened, because the people who would get offended are not people who would buy the books in the first place for the most part. So it has to be on the first page or two when they're just sort of browsing where they would notice it and complain or something. I feel like we did have a complaint about one book that started out with something some kind of very bloody something or other on the first page or two, but I can't recall which book it was. And I think it was a small tempest that burned itself out. So we were okay.
So we're approaching the 1 hour mark, so I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to address anything you want to. But first, and I warned you about this, Orc145626 says, "What is your favorite thing to drink? Do you like coffee or soda? What are your go-tos?"
Well, I love Diet Coke, but I've given it up. And now I mainly drink water and green tea. So it's very sad. But Diet Coke is my one true love, and maybe someday I'll go back.
I can't give up my Coke Zero. Sorry, it's not going to happen. I don't have any other vices. That's it. So, whether it's going to be what it's going to be. If something's got to kill me, I guess it's Coke Zero. Dan actually comes in with a late question. What Abyss title would you most like to see adapted to film?
Oh boy.
Oh my God. Get out of there. I have an answer to this. Descent by Ron Day. Absolutely.
Oh, that would be great.
It's a perfect film.
That would be great. That would be totally great. Yeah, well, all the titles we're talking about, Prototype, The Cipher, Lost
I'm terrified.
Souls, The Poppy Bright Book,
I'm surprised Lost
Great
Souls hasn't.
Markings. Yeah.
That's shocking. As far as the Hodge books, I would be terrified they'd change the endings. Especially Prototype, right? Prototype with a happy ending. Can you imagine?
Oh my gosh.
It ends with a joke and a freeze frame, like a 70s sitcom. Griffin asks, how arduous was it getting the title The Whipping Boy past the censors?
It was no problem at all. One could imagine that could be a problem, but that's kind of a saying that just means like the person you're blaming for something. So I think it was maybe taken that way. Actually, this is kind of maybe a funny story, that John Byrne, the author of that book, very, very much did not want the word "the" in the title. The title is Whipping Boy. And by accident, the art department had put in the, so when I sent him like a mock-up of the cover, he was very upset because he thought we had retitled the book, which we had not. It was just a mistake of the art department. And he's like, there's no "the," because there had been kind of a thing in horror where lots of titles started with "the."
Yeah.
And he did not want to be one of those people who wrote those titles. So he did not want any "the," but we got rid of "the." So everything was okay.
So in the chat, we have the great steak sauce of the Off the Grill podcast.
Oh.
And he is a very shy boy, so don't mind that he doesn't have a question. He just wanted to say hi.
Hi there, steak sauce.
There you go. So what's next? You can't go back into the shadows. We need you. So what's next in the world of Jeanne Cavelos?
Well, I'm working on my next novel. It's called, at least right now, it's called Fatal Spiral. It's a near future science thriller about genetic manipulation and cloning. And there's plenty of horrific stuff in it. So hopefully that will get finished and come out someday. And of course, I'm running the Odyssey Writing Workshops Charitable Trust, which is a nonprofit with the mission of helping writers of horror, fantasy, and science fiction improve their work. We hold a 6-week workshop every summer. We hold online classes in the winter, and we offer free resources year-round. So if anybody is writing out there, check out our website, odysseyworkshop.org, and you'll find lots of free stuff there, podcasts, blog, etc. And I love working with horror writers, so would love to work with you. And we have a scholarship, a full scholarship of tuition and housing for our 6-week workshop from George R.R. Martin for a writer of Lovecraftian cosmic horror. So if that's what you write, send in that application.
Get it done, people.
Deadline April 1st. So I'm doing that, teaching fiction writing at a college near where I live, and doing a little scouting for movie people of, good books, especially good horror books that could be made into movies. So, and TV. So that's fun too.
So where can they find you? Where can we follow you online?
JeanneCavelos.com. I got a Facebook page, J. Cavelos, I think it is. Odyssey has a Facebook page, Odyssey Workshop. You can find me on Twitter under the Odyssey Workshop also. So I'm all over the place. I'm easy to find. You can, at my website, you can email me from there if you got any questions or anything. Happy to talk to other writers and lovers of horror.
Awesome. So, Jeanne, I know we made you blush at the beginning of this, but really, what you've done for the genre is incalculable for an entire generation. We needed you and what you helped facilitate. I don't think Del Abyss would ever have happened anywhere else under a different name had you not made it happen. So many great artists came out of that really tiny period in time, and the impact is still being felt strongly today. Those first few waves that you made are tidal waves now. We're just waiting for it to break. I don't think there is a more important moment in my lifetime for the genre than what you created. That might sound like hyperbole to you. It's not. Because so much was the same for so long. Even though I was loving it by the same rate, you brought the promise to fruition. So for myself and for definitely the viewers on this show, and for everyone who's not going to watch this show but should, thank you. Thank you so much. You've made all of our lives better. Brian says that you left him better than you found him. Let me tell you, there are literally hundreds of thousands of people that could say that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lauren. It's that is lovely, and I'm just so happy that, you know, this work that I did at my desk back in New York 30 years ago still is like helping people to have enjoyable experiences and read great stories and get something out of them and get inspired and get excited and get scared. That's great to hear. Thank you.
All right. So, guys, we are back on Friday with Mark Gunnels at 8 o'clock regular time. And then, of course, I will be taking a little bit of a medical leave from you for the rest of the month, pretty much. But I'll see you on Friday, guys. Thanks a lot.
You don't have to do that.
I think we do.